All right. Are you ready for me, Kate? Okay. Welcome, Wednesday night Bible study. We're glad that you're here. I missed you all on Sunday. I suppose that you went to church. I can't, Vera. Can't. So I'm glad to be back, and we're going to be starting Genesis chapter 36. But we're not going to read it. We're just going to look at it. Genesis 36. And right after I have a word of prayer, we'll jump into it. Father God, we're grateful tonight that we can come into your house. We're thankful that we have your word, and we're so grateful for the author, the Holy Spirit, being in our presence. I pray tonight that he would have an opportunity, he'd be given permission, that he can come into our hearts and our minds, and that he can speak to us concerning the nuances found here, that we just don't do a topical reading, glancing over it, but that as we slow down, that we might listen to him as he speaks to our hearts about what we're going to read tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, chapter 36. In just a few observations about this, because that would just be terrible for me to ask you guys to do all these names, right? Say, nod your head, yes. So we're not going to make you do that. But the reason that God puts this in, remember, the Israelites are standing on the edge of the Jordan River, looking across to the Promised Land. And Moses is giving them this history. They are going to go into Canaan, and they are going to take the land, and any Canaanite that refuses to surrender and become a part of the Jewish nation, they're going to destroy. But they want to be sure, God wants to be sure, that they, in the wars against the Canaanites, that they do not kill any Edomites. Because they live in this land of Canaan. And the reason why God doesn't want any of the Edomites to be killed is because they're all the descendants of Esau. And they didn't know that. I mean, they grew up in Egypt. They didn't know anything about Canaanites. So the reason why God wants to spare the Edomites is because Esau was the brother of Jacob, Israel. And look at chapter 33 and verse 4. When Esau ran to meet him, he hugged him, he fell on his neck, he kissed him, they cried. And that was a much different reaction than Jacob was expecting. Jacob was wondering whether Esau would still be mad. And then look at chapter 36 and verse. Well, we'll read that. That's not too bad to read. You got that, Norm? Genesis 36 verses 6 through 8.
His wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, his livestock, and all his beasts, and all his property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan. He went into a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. The land of their sojournings could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir.
Does it say Esau is Edom? So, he's not a believer. He despised his birthright. But even after Jacob got the blessing that was intended for Esau, Isaac gave him a separate blessing. And God honored that. So the fact that Esau was extremely, extremely wealthy. And yet he moves. He was there first, but he moves. And that's, God liked that. God blessed him for that. And so when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan and started eliminating the Canaanites, because of Esau's generosity and his kindness, God allowed them to live. We see that once in a while, don't we? People who are not believers, who are not churchgoers, who don't really even fear God, sometimes they're the nicest people. You ever notice that? We sometimes make people who aren't Christians out to be really bad people. And sometimes they're really nice people. And on the same token, there's some church people that are really bad people. Wow. So this is just another example where you've got a person that didn't necessarily want to be a part of God's family, God's laws, and yet he was a very nice person. And so that's what chapter 36, and that's why that's there. Now, chapter 37. Norm, you got it? You ready? Read the first 11 verses, please.
Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report from them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, you were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and his brothers, His father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the same in his mind.
All right. One of the great disservices that we do to this text, and we've heard this text for a long time. We hear it in Vacation Bible School, Sunday school. We picture Joseph as being this boy that's just a big tattletale. And he's always getting his brothers in trouble. And right away, in verse 3, that is corrected because Joseph was how old? 17. Now, that may not be old in our culture, but 17, then, there were kings younger than that. For a girl to be 17 and not married yet, old maid. I mean, it was a different life. I mean, we have boys dying in service at the age of 18. So 17 is not young. It was younger than the brothers. But Reuben, who was the oldest, was probably about 24 if Joseph was 17, because there was 7 years difference. And then you go right down the line. Simeon would have been 23, Levi 22, Judah 21, Issachar 19, Zebulun 18. And then you go back to the concubines, and you got Dan at 21, and Naphtali at 20, and Gad at 19, and Asher at 18. Because remember, he had these 11 kids in 7 years. It gives a whole new meaning to barefoot and pregnant, doesn't it? So, and it says that Jacob loved Joseph because he had him when he was old. Maybe, but there's another reason why Joseph was his favorite. And that's because of Joseph's mother. And his mother's name was Rachel. That is the real reason. And this animosity started long before chapter 37. Remember when they were back in Padan Aram working for Laban? When Jacob first laid eyes on the girls, he was at a well. And who did he see first? Rachel. Love at first sight. He was so in love with her that he was willing to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. Now, can you imagine the conversations that were had? Because I don't know how much he was around, and I know the culture was completely different, but in those 7 years, you've got to believe that there were times when they either spoke to each other or were in the same vicinity with each other, and you could tell by his eyes how in love he was with this girl. I don't know anything about being sisters. I never was a sister. I was a brother, but I was a brother to sisters, not other brothers. So I don't know how sisters are. But if Jacob was making eyes at Rachel, don't you think Leah knew that? Yeah. And then, just imagine the discussion these two girls had after the wedding night. When he thought he was in the tent with Rachel, and he was in the tent with Leah. Now, for those next 7 years, Rachel and Leah knew their positions, right? Leah knew she was second place. And Leah was popping out babies left and right, and then boom, 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 and thinking all the time. In fact, remember, she named these kids thinking that this was going to make Jacob love her more. And the point I'm getting at is, if all this time Leah knew that Jacob loved Rachel more than her, when Jacob wasn't around and the boys were growing up in this house, don't you imagine that Leah talked about that? Yeah. Talked about your Aunt Rachel. Dad loves her more than me. Over and over. And when kids hear that kind of talk at home, it affects them. It does. I mean, how could it not? Here you want to protect your mom. And all you've heard growing up is how your dad loves your mom's sister. Duh. This whole jealousy thing between Joseph and his brothers started way before chapter 37. Now, we already had the part where Reuben made his move to inherit everything, and that backfired. Jacob says, well, you were firstborn, but I'm not going to give you the birthright. Judah's next in line, and we're going to see how that, but I don't even know if Judah was going to be considered, because at the age of 17, Jacob makes Joseph the boss. And when you read verse 2, Joseph wasn't out there as a shepherd. He was shepherding the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. He wasn't shepherding the sheep. He was shepherding the boys. He had been given authority. He had been given rulership. He was put in charge. So when you are supervisor, all right, now you're the supervisor in a shop, in a factory, and you've got people under you, and they're not doing their job, you're supposed to let the boss know. And that's all he was doing. Happens to be his dad. They happen to be his stepbrothers. Still, hey, these guys are shirking their job. They're supposed to be out there tending the sheep. They're sitting under the shade tree. There was a couple of sheep flipped over on their back. We lost them because those two yahoos weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Jacob says, well, thank you for telling me that. Now, grammatically, you've got Joseph as in a position of authority. And it really grates these guys, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, because in the natural of order of things, where does these two concubines come in? They're lower on the totem pole to begin with. So their boys are lower on the totem pole. Next, we read in verse 3, we've already got problems. We've got this jealousy thing going. We've got one over the other. And it bothered the boys because if anybody's going to be in authority, why would you give it to the youngest? And to make matters worse, his dad makes him a coat. And really, the thing that most scholars believe that set it off was that it had long sleeves. Not just the fact that it was very colored, but that it had long sleeves. Because if you're doing manual labor, you roll your sleeves up. Short sleeves are the thing. Long sleeves, all that told the other boys is, sorry, I can't do any work. I got my long sleeves on. Just sent them through the roof. Now, you might think that I'm just imagining this stuff, but we're going to see where this comes in. Puts him in a position of authority, gives him a special coat. The only other time that very colored coat is even mentioned is in 2 Samuel chapter 13. And there it was used to describe the coat that David's daughter wore before she was raped. So it was a coat of an evidence of royalty. And even though there's no king here, it's still a coat that tells these boys David is in a different level. So, the intensity of the hatred begins in verse 5. What do you suppose Joseph is doing? He's sleeping. And he had a dream. I had a dream. But the people that do a lot of end times studying, they're always talking literally, and they talk about the moon turning into blood and the sun turning black and darkness over and they use all of these terminology and they're real literal about it. When Joseph mentions his first dream, do you think any of those boys thought that they were going to be out working in the field someday and all of a sudden the sheaves were going to stand up and start bowing down? No. They thought he had a dream about us. And guess what? We're the sheaves that are bowing down. And we don't like it. And I imagine they told him so because they said one thing, this is never going to happen with us. You can be sure of that. Because if you think our sheaves are we're just going to cut our sheaves right down and bail them up. It's not going to happen. Then he has another dream. Oh, man. And in this dream, does he mention his mother, his father, or his brothers? Look at that. Does he mention their names at all? No. Sun, moon, 11 stars. And who do they think the sun is? Dad. And who do they think the moon is? Yeah, which mom? Rachel. Yeah, it's his mom. And then the 11 stars, they're the brothers. So they're not taking this literally. They're not thinking someday they're going to look up and these planets are going to be, they're thinking this is talk about symbolism. So in Matthew 24, when Jesus says that the sun and the moon will fall, he's talking about Pilate, Caiaphas, Herod, leaders of both religious and physical governments that are going to topple. And he goes on in 24. I mean, he's talking about the whole leveling of the Jewish system. But here we go back to Genesis. How come he didn't tell his mom this dream? Well, he did, but chapter 35, she's already dead. But they still got the message. The boys still got, they said, and see, here's the part where I said that Joseph's job was one of authority, that he had been granted a supervisor's role over his brothers because they said in verse 8, are you actually going to reign over us? Really going to rule over us?
Why does his dad ask, will your mother and I and your brother actually come and bow down to the ground before you?
Because there was still been 3 moms in the picture. Because Rachel was dead. So, mom's still there. Just not the one he loved. But his brothers, and that's a good question, Tim, because when they come from Canaan into Egypt, those 3 ladies will come, and because they'll still be alive. And then his dad, he said, very interesting. I don't see it happening. I mean, where are we ever going to be that we would be bowing down to you? I mean, what were the circumstances like for that? But the boys, it's got it. The intensity here, and the reason that they are so mad is because they refuse to submit to his authority. And that's one of the ways that Joseph is an antitype to Jesus. Because one of the things that made the Jewish rulers so mad about Jesus was they refused to acknowledge his authority. Over and over and over, they said, who gave you that authority? Where do you think you get this idea that you're in charge? You never were educated. You didn't go to the schools we went to. You didn't study under the people we studied. I mean, you don't quote anybody when you teach. Mercy. When you teach, all you quote is yourself. Like you're some kind of God or something. Jesus. Why would he quote anybody? He wrote the scriptures. He knows exactly what they meant. Yeah, he wouldn't need to quote anybody. But they hated Jesus because of his authority. And these boys hate Joseph. Okay, Tim, would you read verses 12 through 17, please?
Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'"
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, so Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, you see again the supervisor's role? The boys are pasturing the flock. Where's Joseph? He's home with his dad, probably doing the books. Let me see here. 12 sheep, 13 donkeys. You know, he's working at home. And his dad said, "I want you to go and check on the boys to see if they're doing their job, to see about their welfare." And the reason I bring that up, because I said, remember, last week when we were reading this, I said, remember, Dina decided to go into town. They were having a party. What town was that? No. Nice. That was a good guess. Could we just read it? No, where was that town? Shechem. It was in Shechem. That's where Dina got in trouble. And the two boys, because the prince of Shechem, he wanted to marry Dina. And the two boys said, "Well, we've got this religion, and you're going to have to join it. And it's really pretty simple. I mean, you don't have to do a whole lot of things. You just got to be circumcised." I mean, if you love her, how big a deal is that? And the prince convinced all of the men of Shechem to get circumcised. And then the two boys did what? Killed them all. Killed them all. Took the wives and the children, all the livestock, all the crops, all the money, all the jewelry. They cleaned out the place. And now years have gone, because Jacob had bought just a little part of some property in Shechem. So he takes his sheep back there to graze them. Are you kidding me? There must have been good pasture there. But that's why he says to Joseph, "Go see if the boys are okay." Why would they not be okay going back to Shechem? Because they stunk up the place the last time they were there. And there could be some residual, some hillbillies running around, some McCoys thinking, "I'm going to get these." Oh, those are the guys. Let's turn things around here. So Joseph goes and he checks on the boys, and they've left Shechem, and they've gone to Dothan, and he says, "Okay, I'll go." Becky, would you read verses 18 through 24? Got your name right.
But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him in one of these cisterns and say that a furious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Then Reuben heard this, and he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern along or here in the desert, but do not lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it.
In verse 19, did they say, here comes the supervisor? Here comes the guy with the special coat? No. What do they say? Here comes the dreamer. Man, that dream stuck in their craw. I mean, they could get past, oh yeah, big supervisor. I mean, we all have bosses that, so what? But then, that coat would have given him away from a long distance. Because they couldn't see his arms. Oh, he's wearing that coat. Good deal. We're going to use that. So the boys get together and they said, man, let's just kill him. And throw him into a pit. And it's going to be so easy to cover it up. Because we'll have the evidence right in our hands. What were they going to use? The coat. And do what with it? Cover it in blood. And back then, there was no CSI where they could have done a DNA match to find out whether or not that was real blood, Joseph's blood. So they just had to say, it's blood. Must be Joseph's. It's on his coat. Now, Reuben, he was right in that. He had good reason to hate Joseph, just like all the others did, but it looks like he was more afraid of his dad than he hated his brother. And so he's thinking, I've got an idea. And let's, instead of killing him, let's just throw him into this cistern and let nature take its course. We didn't kill him just because there was no way out, and that cistern, when it started raining, was going to fill up with water. Not our fault. He was alive when we put him in there. Oh, man. They took that coat off of him. Now the pit was empty. You suppose that's a coincidence? No. God's got this all under control. All under control. Doesn't look like it, but he does. Okay. You ready to read, Joe? 25 through 28.
As he sat down to eat their meal, he looked up and saw a cavern of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. The camels were loaded with spices, balm, and oil. They were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and come up with his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." The brothers agreed. When the midnight merchants came up, his brother pulled Joseph up out of his sister and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt.
Isn't that just so funny? Right there in verse 27. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him, because after all, he is our brother. I mean, he's our own flesh and blood. Judah. And notice the callousness of these guys. And they're going to mention this to Joseph when he is ruler. They're going to tell us further on in Genesis, not only did they sit down to eat, they threw him in the pit, and then it's lunchtime. I'll have the ham. Oh, no, they couldn't have a ham sandwich. Lamb sandwich. So they sit down to eat, and later on we're going to find out from the scriptures that Joseph was crying to be rescued during this whole time. You're listening to your brother plead for his life. Did you pass the ketchup? Who brought the lemonade? I mean, it's hot out here. Cruel. I mean, these guys are cruel. And selling him, was that really kindness? No, not at all. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Reuben wanted to return to his father. Judah never mentions that. Now, Robin, would you read 29 through 36?
Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they set the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not." Then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard.
Obviously, at some point in time, because Benjamin is 11, he died, his mom died giving birth to him. So someplace here in the last 11 years or so, one of these women, Leah, Bilhah, or Zilpah, had given birth to some more girls. Why don't we know their names? Because they're girls. It's not just because they're girls, it's because they didn't have anything to do with this story. Dinah is mentioned because she is the impetus that moved them out of Shechem. God didn't want them in Shechem to begin with. So that's why she's brought in. These other yahoos, they're in there because they're going to become, can you imagine? They're going to become the nation of Israel. Wow. Don't you think God could have picked some people that were, I mean, there must have been Canaanites that weren't as dumb, weren't as cruel, weren't as vicious as these guys. I mean, they're just flat out mercenaries. Oh, let's sell him. He's our own flesh and blood. And then, yeah.
Were only, what, like 18? And they'd probably be thinking, well, I better just go along with this, otherwise he's going to sell me too.
Yeah, there were 2 that were 18, 2 that were 19, 2 that were 20. So they were young. But the oldest one was only 24. So they're not that much difference. But they all had to agree. They had to get their story straight. Judah's the only one that talked about selling him. So we don't know where Reuben went, probably to get a sandwich. A little pastoral humor there. But when he gets back, what's he expecting to find? Joseph in the cistern. And he gets back and he says, hey, fellas, we got a problem. Joe's gone. And they said, nah, we made some money. 20 shekels. And with Joseph gone and Benjamin still home, he doesn't even know about it, it's 2 shekels apiece. Pretty good. Their dad was completely, I mean, he just lost it. Jacob is deceived by the killing of the goat. What did they use to deceive Jacob's dad, Isaac? Remember when they were going to talk about the blessing and Rebekah said, pretend you're Esau. When they went to Isaac, what did they use to deceive Isaac into thinking that Jacob was really Esau? They used a goat. Not only did they have to kill that goat because they used its skin, its hide, but Rebecca, the mom with the flair she took the goat, made it a delicious meal that tasted like gazelle or antelope or something wild. And now Jacob is being deceived by a goat. Isn't that ironic? God works in this, brings things to light that makes us pause and think, wow. Okay. Meanwhile, the Midianites, they didn't want him. I mean, they were just looking, to trade. And so they sell him to Potiphar. Oh, I gotta stop right there because I've got the name. Where did I put that? Oh, yeah. Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, captain of the guard. Really, that word for officer should be eunuch. And oftentimes, most cases, in the Egyptian government, anybody that was high up who served Pharaoh was a eunuch. So if you aspired to that office, it was costly. Why in the world would they want to make all their officers that served under Pharaoh eunuchs? They want to make sure the line's pure, no fooling around with the harem. One of those ladies sneak in her boy. So there was no hanky-panky with the harem. And it was such a call of sacrifice that if you were willing to do that, to serve Pharaoh, you must have been serious. Wasn't one of those whims. I think I'll become an officer of Pharaoh for a while. What? I have to do what? Yeah, no more marriage for you. And yet, he's got a wife. We'll get into that next week. So he's got, Pharaoh was his eunuch, and he was the captain of the bodyguard, means the chief of police. Now remember that, because that's going to come into play next week. Meanwhile, we've got a side thing here. Chapter 38. Sally, would you read verses 1 through 5?
Yes. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hurrah. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son, named him Anan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezem that she gave birth to him.
And we don't know what time it is. It says at that time. We don't know what time it is. I don't know, 4 o'clock or what. But he doesn't talk to his dad. Total disregard for what God has been trying to institute in this whole clan. And he goes and grabs a Canaanite girl. And I think it was because he was hanging out with this Canaanite named Ernie. And I think that Ernie was just bad. And look at it. He started visiting with this Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Hira said, we got some really nice looking girls in this town. And you ought to be thinking about that, Judah. You're not getting any younger. Wow, you must be, 25? Jeez, time is passing you by, boy. So he picks up this girl named Shua, and you know that Judah doesn't have a huge vocabulary. He calls his first son Was he thinking out loud? Nice name, we'll take it. You've got to be kidding me. And then she gets pregnant again, and he calls his name Onan. And finally, there's a name that's got some kind of a name-ish quality to it, Sheila. So he was thinking that things would be better if he had a friend. And Hira was no friend. But here it goes. Now let's go to verse 6. And Pat, would you read verses 6 through 11?
And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in to thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, Lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house.
Okay. Now, Judah doesn't do for his boy what he did. Judah doesn't let pick out his wife. He picks it for him. I'm guessing experience. You know, picking out my own wife wasn't such a good idea. And Ernie didn't help. So he picks out the girl for I don't know. But for whatever reason, didn't like it. He was a bad boy. I mean, he was wicked. And so God killed him. Now, often we think about this levirate law where, you remember the Pharisees brought this up to Jesus as a trick question. So-and-so had a wife and he died, and then the brother came and he died, and the brother came and he died, and the brother came and he... So on the resurrection, whose husband, whose wife will she be? We often think that was something that God instituted into the Israel through Moses. But here we find out this was practiced way before then. This is way before then. I mean, it's going to be 400 years before Moses even comes, and we're not even to Egypt yet. This is way before then. So, Judah says, get in there, boy, and give me a son for And Onan said, I'm not doing that. This isn't going to be me. I'm not going to get anything out of it. So I'm not doing it. God kills him. Now, it is inferred, the idea we get is that Judah has no idea why these two boys have died. And I doubt that Tamar talked to him about it. But he's worried. He thinks Tamar is the problem. And he's not quite sure, the more he thinks about it, that he wants his youngest to be around, because she's kind of like a black widow. I mean, they go in, they never come out. There must be something wrong with her. Well, there's nothing wrong with her. Oh, got to quit right there. We're done. Okay, pick it up next week. Oh, the suspense. It's going to kill you all week long.